And so when you think through this, why is the NFT market taking off so much? Is this just a bubble? Is it unsustainable? But like, what's your analysis as to why there's so much interest and so much demand right now in this market specifically?
I think there's a couple things. I think there is definitely a lot of hype. I think there's no way to not be like, okay, there's people are going ape shit. So I'm not, so naive to think that that's not a piece of it. Yet at the same time, and so I think there's this thing where it's kind of, it may be a bubble, but it's sort of one of these things where I also see a huge amount of legitimate long-term value for this as an asset class. And I think we've only scratched the surface of different mechanics for how these can work, different utility use cases, because a lot of the utility use cases, could be dependent on things that happen in the real world. And right now the real world's kind of, everything's got a big asterisk around it because of COVID. So we really haven't even been able to see a lot of these utility use cases really sort of, played out. I look at people who are sort of like, oh, this, if you buy this NFT, it gets you some backstage, concert. Well, those concerts aren't able to like happen yet. So we haven't really even seen that kind of play out. But I think there are just so many uses for this stuff. And I think it's such an interesting new, way to sort of store value that I think, people are seeing that. And I think sort of long-term, like macro high level, looking at this as an asset class, I think this could be something that really sort of appeals to, younger sort of investors. And I think there's nothing really written in stone that investors, right now, the for the last 50 so years or whatever, the predominant way that people sort of invested was like equities. And there's nothing that says that has to just keep going forever. And I think a lot of younger investors, they kind of hate corporations. They really don't like companies. And so to think that they're automatically just going to invest their money in companies moving forward, like, I don't know that I would, that's not set in stone. Like, they could look at other things that speak more to them in terms of asset classes. And I think NFTs could be a huge, piece of that moving forward, that they would rather invest in something that, they have a bit more ownership over, and they can sort of do what they want with a little more, and they identify with more than sort of, okay, I grew up, let me put my money in GE and IBM and all this fucking shit that I don't give a fuck about, or like, this doesn't speak to me, and it isn't really something I want to support in some ways. So I think that, well, there is a lot of hype right now. I think it also feels like we're still very much at the beginning of this.
So when you think through kind of what's working, what's not working, are there specific things, whether it's in kind of your formula for success or other things you see in the market where you're like, this is definitely kind of a winning strategy from the artist perspective?
That's a good question. I really think there's a lot of different like things, and obviously, like, it's not just me who's seeing a tremendous amount of sort of, growth and success in this space. So I think there's a lot of things that people are trying that are working quite well. And I don't think there's one sort of like, this is the path. And I think, it's evolving very quickly too. I look at like the hash mask thing, and like that, had like a massive, sort of moment. And I think you're going to see a bunch of generative, sort of projects happen from that. I think there's just a bunch of different mechanics that people have not tried yet too, with the smart contracts, and making these sort of gamifying the ownership, experience a bit more, the collecting experience. So I think that's something that, there's still a huge amount of potential there. But yeah, I think that to me is sort of the fun part of this, is it feels like we're at the beginning and we're writing the rules. And so I don't think there's necessarily one, like, this is what you should do, release this kind of this. And also because each artist is different. Like, I have 5,000, pieces that I spent 2 or 3 hours on. And some people have like, oh, here's I've got 5 pieces of work that I've done, but I spent 2 years on each one of them. How do I sort of split that up? So I think there's really a bunch of different, paths to success with this stuff.